Live from the chicken wing capital of the world, Buffalo, New York. You're listening to the Childcare Bridge podcast, your source for the best tips, tools, and tactics on how to market and grow your childcare center, ensuring total domination. Total domination. This is the Childcare Bridge, and this is your host, Michael Tasner.
So where do you actually put your marketing budgets? In today's episode of the Childcare Bridge, I wanted to talk a bit about budget allocation. Now I'm going to give you a couple of disclaimers as I start to give you this content, but I will tell you that this is not the episode that you want to listen to if you need to figure out how much you should budget. So I'll link in the show notes. But I want you to be able to go and actually watch that if you're like, well, Michael, I don't even know where to start in terms of, do I need $1,000 a month? Do I need $1 million? Whatever that is. So I want you to go and listen to that episode. And I will give you very broad strokes just so that we have some data to work with. The average childcare center should be investing. Now the key word there is should be investing between 5 and 7% of their gross projected sales or their gross projected income. So if you are forecasting that you're going to do, let's say, $1 million this year in terms of tuition, and maybe if you have any other add-on revenue streams for your center or centers, on the low side, you want to be at $50,000 a month. So go and listen to that episode, and a lot of you, oh my gosh, those numbers are so large. What I will tell you is that I have never seen in my 12 years of working with childcare centers, I've never seen a childcare center that is allocating enough money to marketing. So when you come to me and you say, Michael, how do I grow? I want to have 20 locations. I want to franchise, whatever your growth goals are. The way that you're going to accomplish them is by investing more money and more time in marketing. That's it. Outside of acquisitions. But as you acquire other locations, you're going to need marketing by way of time and money. So that's just a little aside that if you're like, oh my gosh, these numbers that he's throwing out, go and listen to that episode where it talks about budgets. But no, and this is like, I will continue to state this as many episodes as it takes, that you are never investing enough in marketing. You're never investing enough. So if you're complaining that your profits aren't where you want them to be, your staff isn't happy enough, you can't take the vacations you want, you can't hire that operational person, you can't buy another location, the formula is very, very simple. You need to build a wait list around the block. You do that by more marketing and better marketing. With a wait list, you can continue to increase your tuition. Now you can go and increase your tuition immediately. That's a whole nother episode that I would encourage you to listen to as well. But as you actually have more and more demand than you actually have space for, you can keep raising those prices to improve your profits, to improve wages, and to do a lot more exciting things. So I'm going to make the assumption that you actually do have a marketing budget, or you're with me in saying, okay, great, I understand the ranges that you're giving by way of budgets, so let me continue to stay engaged. There are two completely different tracks you're going to have to take. Track number one is if you have some data. Now, the other disclaimer that I'm going to give you is that I don't know of very many, if any, childcare centers that I've worked with or that we manage the marketing for that should be going into each layer of what I'm going to share with you. But I always like to give you the context so that you can talk more intelligently with your agency, with your team, with yourself if you're trying to do the marketing yourself. So on one side, there's you don't have a lot of data. You don't actually know what has been driving you tours and enrollments, or you haven't really invested much of anything at all in marketing. So that's this side. On the other side of the spectrum is that either you're working with an agency like mine, or you have some data that you can start to tell me Here's what it's saying by way of a conversion. So here's where it gets a little bit tricky. So I'm going to start with how would I invest if you have some data. So if I have some data, there's something called multi-touch attribution, or MTA. And the reason that this is really important for you to look at is you want to look at where did somebody hear about you first, and then to be able to track it ideally all the way to where they decided to take a tour and enroll. So for example, maybe they drove by and they just happened to see your sign, and they were driving and it took a year for them to call, but they called by going to Google and looking for the Google business profile. They found your listing, they called that number. And then from there, they said, okay, and maybe they had a conversation where they didn't schedule a tour. But because you've got a savvy marketing team like ours, you were able to recapture them through something called remarketing. So maybe the Facebook ad they saw then drove them to book the tour. And then ultimately, ideally, they end up enrolling. So in that case, you would have your signage would be considered one of the touch points, and that would be what I would call a first in touch point. So where did they hear about you or see you first? Then the next one would have been Google organic as your second point. And then the last in, so what actually drove them to commit to either making a purchase or scheduling that tour, would be the actual Facebook ads. So what that allows me to do is start to see, okay, there were 3 different areas. So you might only look at it on a granular level and say, well, Facebook ads is showing all this like that's where all these people are coming and booking tours. But what you don't realize is that they're shopping you beforehand. They're visiting your website. They're finding you through organic. Maybe they saw one of your billboards. Maybe they heard a radio ad. Maybe they saw your Facebook ad first. And then the radio ad or the billboard put them over the edge. Your potential families, they need to hear about you 7, 8, 10 plus times before they even decide to call in or visit the site and fill out a form. There's always going to be a multi-touch approach. But I'm looking to laser in on the data of where do they hear about us first, and then what put them over the edge to book that final tour. And what I would do with that data is I would make sure that I'm putting more marketing dollars and more weight to the first in and the last in sources. So you're going to start to see the data, and it's going to start to show you, well, most people that finally book the tour, they come from our website, but according to the data, they do a search preschool near me. Even though they know our brand name, they heard about us, that still is where they're then finally booking the tour. Or is it a branded search? And that just allows you to put more weight. And then I can look at where did they first hear about us, and I'm going to add more marketing dollars to that. So if I had a $5,000 budget, I might put $1,500 on Facebook ads if that was the last in attribution. If the first in was, let's call it Google organic, I might put $1,500 there. And then I would take that remaining $2,000 and I would do some of the sources that I know have been working, and then put a little budget to actually test something that's brand new that we haven't done. With everything, you want to make sure that you're tracking the process. Conversion pixels, you're using some kind of tracking software, tracking phone numbers, tracking ads, landing pages, certain keywords, if you're giving out any kind of coupon code or a voucher, all this stuff needs to be tracked so that you can kind of build that customer journey life cycle, the parent life cycle, to just start to look at the entire process. Now, with all of this, I never throw out the entire playbook. So while I don't want you to just dust off last year and say we're just going to do the exact same thing, if you've been growing every single year, you shouldn't completely reinvent the wheel. But you can start to layer data on top to start to make smarter marketing decisions. But just because the data simply says everything is coming from here, I don't want you to just completely stop the process. So, well, we're going to completely stop doing email because it doesn't show anyone decided to book a tour through email. Maybe you didn't have all the tracking set up correctly inside of Google, for example. So if you've been growing year over year after year and kind of growing steadily, and you've got a good amount of demand with that marketing budget that you've been investing, don't just throw it out the window. Continue, but make some tweaks and some changes off of what that attribution data is telling you. If you don't have the attribution data, you've got to get in there. You've got to hire a firm like ours to make sure that your analytics are dialed in. You've got a great customer relationship management software. Your team is putting in the tracking and the data. They're asking the right questions. You need this data to make smarter decisions. I talked in a previous episode about data. If you don't have data, you really have no business. You have to be able to look at the numbers, size them up, and make strategic decisions. Now, on the flip side, if you have not invested a lot in marketing, or you can't tell me what is actually working, the recommendation is always to go after some of the things that are considered best practices that I can tell you and teach you that are getting the best results. So what we're seeing the best results with is Google Organic, and that is search engine optimization, that is having a content strategy, so investing money and resources into content marketing, writing content that people are actually searching for. If they're searching for what are the things that I should ask on a daycare tour, you're going to write a 2,500 word article, or your agency is, and you're going to rank for that. And you're going to do another piece of content and another piece of content. You're going to keep pumping out all of this great content. The other one that goes along with that is your Google business profile listing. That should be ranking in what's called the Google 3-pack. So you want to make sure that you're ranking for preschool near me, daycare near me, Montessori, for example, all those different keywords. Those that we have found tend to be the highest quality leads, the ones that tend to then book the tours the quickest. In terms of how do you then generate awareness with some of your other marketing dollars, if you don't have data or you really haven't tested, I want to see you, depending on your budget, spread things out a little bit. I am a big fan of billboards if it's on the route to your center. You can typically get billboards for less than $1,000 a month, if that. I want to see you test out Facebook ads as well as Google ads. I want to make sure that your team is posting actively on social media, so having a content strategy that's focused on social. Other than that, unless your budget was more robust, I wouldn't try and spread yourself too thin. If you're only investing a few $1,000s a month, I don't want to see you put $50 at Reddit, $50 on TikTok, $50 on Instagram, $50 on Facebook, $100 on this, $50, like you're not going to be able to have enough empirical data. But start to test a couple of these sources. So your Google Organic, your Google Business Profile. So that's SEO. I would put 33% of my budget there. I would put another 33% between Facebook and Google ads. And then the remaining 33% of my budget, I would pick one or two other sources depending on budgets. Cold email, for example, doesn't really work great from a business to consumer standpoint. If you're going to do some direct mail, postcard campaigns can work well if they're multi-campaigns. But I wouldn't want to see you start testing with radio and all these other sources right out of the gate. I would rather see that remaining 33% be strategic partnerships, Dream 100 relationships, and or events that you're actually putting on. So what that does is it allows you to start testing, gathering data, and then refining your marketing plan and your marketing budgets as you go, versus you're leveraging that multi-touch level of first in, last in if you've got the hard data. But I wanted to give you this so you could start to think as you're building out your budgets, where do you actually put it, with the most common denominator being you need hard data. You need that conversion data of where are they calling, where are they visiting from first, and what is putting them over the edge. That is how you start to make better and smarter marketing decisions. Get out there, adjust your budgets. Michael Tazzer signing off. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.